Hi. To be able to use the full power of CBT, we need to understand a little bit more about the CBT model of how human brains work. You could call it the Self Help CBT operating model if you like, but it basically looks like this. And of course this is entirely relevant to GAD because we need to use this to start to create strategies for eradicating GAD. So look, in the first instance you have thoughts, okay? Now in CBT we tend to focus quite a lot on thoughts because we have access to thoughts and we have a little bit less access to emotions. We feel emotions, we experience them, but we don't have access to directly changing them a lot of the time. We have behaviors, which of course is what we do, which is cognitive behavior therapy, so that's the B from behavior therapy. And then of course we have sensations, which is basically what our body is doing. And then of course there's a context in which everything operates. So let me tell you a story of a client that I had who was a young girl. She was, when I saw her, she was 20. She had, in principle, always been a worrier. And she had gone to university at age 18 after her A-levels. She did pretty well. And because she'd always been a worrier and she'd never really been diagnosed with GAD, and she'd done well at her A-levels because she put a lot of effort into it. Probably more effort than really it warranted in a way, okay? But she got to university and she was studying a science subject, and I think if I remember right it was biology. And the science subjects, there's an awful lot of material in them and there's an awful lot to remember. Now, she had her friends, she was quite popular, she had her parents, she had her support network at home, and that enabled her to adequately reassure herself that she was doing the right kinds of things. You know, she knew the teachers and she was able to, sort of ask for feedback. But at university, a fresh environment with nobody that she knows, no parents, she doesn't know the lecturers, and of course her intolerance of uncertainty ramps up massively, which enables her to then worry really hard about failing, about not being able to do what she needs to do. And of course, because she doesn't know people particularly, it's very hard to get the reassurance that she was used to having that she was doing the right thing. Now, if you think about the subtext of this, she's a good student because she studied hard. What she's lacking is confidence in her ability. But why is she lacking confidence in her ability? Well, she's lacking confidence in her ability because she worries about potential outcomes. Now, she worries, which is basically a cognitive process. You worry either in images or in language, but worrying is a thing that you do in your head, okay? And a lot of times people worry in language because there is some evidence to suggest that worrying in language is a little bit less fear-inducing than worrying in images. So we tend to worry in language to protect ourselves a little bit. Okay, so she formed the thought that because she didn't know everything about everything in the syllabus in biology, she would fail. Now, you can recognize that if there is any uncertainty, so uncertainty allows catastrophe to creep in. And so she would catastrophize. She would say, if I don't know everything, I'm going to fail, which you'll recognize is a really black and white kind of way of thinking about it. If I don't know everything, I'm going to fail. It's impossible to know everything. Okay, but how do I know that I know the right stuff? What if I don't know the right stuff? And you'll recognize what if as a form of worry structure, okay? What if I don't know the right stuff? What if I don't get good marks? What if I can't keep up? What if I don't manage to have any kind of social life? So I've got nothing, I've got nobody to talk to help me out. So she did a lot of what ifing. Now, how do you suppose that made her feel? She came from a home that was very stable, although she was inherently a worrier, and she'd never really challenged that. She just worked around it by working really, really hard. What do you think she felt? What would be the emotion that she would feel? Well, you'd obviously say things like uncertainty, you'd say things like anxious, you'd say things about like concerned, but actually the emotion is not any of those words. The emotion is always fear. If you have any anxiety disorder, from PTSD, OCD, GAD, health anxiety, social anxiety, the emotion at the heart, at the root of your problem is always going to be fear. Now, fear that what might happen is different in different disorders. In OCD, it might be fear of contamination. In social phobia, it might be fear of embarrassment or fear of being rejected. In health anxiety, it might be fear of having a life-threatening illness such as cancer or a heart attack. In panic, it's fear of having a heart attack, let's say, or fear of losing control, or fear of everyone seeing you lose control. In generalized anxiety disorder, it's likely to be a fear of some catastrophic outcome. It's a fear of some feared outcome. And it can also be, in actual fact, a fear of having anxiety. If you've been anxious long enough, you'll end up being anxious about being anxious, which is basically being fearful about being fearful, which is basically worrying about worrying. And you can see that that becomes quite circular. Okay, her emotion was fear. Now, if you think about what we know already about GAD, right? The first thing that we do is we sort of worry. If there's an intolerance of uncertainty, we worry. And if worry's not going to solve the problem for us, because it never does, then we try to do some kind of avoidance or some negative problem solving. So we try not to think about it. We try to avoid it wherever possible. Now, trying not to think about it, trying to avoid feeling stressed, trying to avoid feeling the emotions that creates, trying to basically distract ourselves, not engage with the problem. Do you think that is going to help if you're studying for a degree in biology? If you avoid the problem, is that going to help? Well, clearly it's not, is it? Because she doesn't actually have a problem. She's a good student. But her problem is that she thinks she's going to fail because she doesn't believe that she knows everything she needs to know, and she doesn't know what she doesn't know, in a sense, right? So she sees black holes. She's catastrophizing. Okay, so she really wants to avoid thinking about it, and she really wants to avoid doing it. So the first thing she does is to work really, really hard, and then the second thing she does is to almost give up working because it's just too much for her. So in the end, what happens is she lasted 2 terms, and then she had to go off, and she had to take a year off, and that's when I saw her. And basically, we had to realize, we had to kind of reformulate the whole thing so she could go back to university and do well. So we had to change her strategy for doing stuff. So if we think of it like this, she would create a thought, or she would have a thought that come into her head, and the thought for her was, I will fail. Now that's not her life experience, and it's not what she wants for herself, so that makes her feel frightened. Because I will fail is a catastrophic, uncontrollable, and thought, but it also feels like something terrible is going to happen. There's nothing she can do about it. It creates the emotion of fear. And then we'll put failure up here. Now, that makes her want to avoid things. Run away, hide. This is classic, right? You always want to avoid things that you're frightened of. Very few people approach fear. And so, now, do you think that made her relaxed? So the sensations that she's having in her body, do you think that thinking that she was going to fail, feeling fearful and wanting to avoid things, wanting to hide, wanting to run away, which in fact is what she did because she left university after 2 terms, is that going to make her calm and relaxed? Is it going to make her stressed, tense, irritable, restless? Do you think her sleep's going to be good? Or do you think her sleep's going to be bad? Well, of course it's going to make her, we'll call it stressed, right? Okay. So there we have a relative picture. Now, and of course the context for this is university. If she hadn't have gone to university, she wouldn't have had these problems, and she would have been absolutely fine. But the thing is, it's a long life, and you can't avoid doing things which are normal and everyone does, and also would give you a more productive and interesting experience. Now, okay, so this is what we've got. But what do you think was one of the first things that I did with her? She is sitting in my office, and she's telling me the story about university, and she's really overwhelmed with a fear of failure. But now, of course, I won't be able to go back. So I won't be able to manage, I won't be able to do it, and she is imagining the same thing happening again. Okay. I say, well, okay, you're sitting here in my office, right? So just talking, how frightened are you? How anxious are you? How upset? How distressing is it? 0, not at all. 10 is as bad as it could be. And she said, oh God, it's 9, 10. It's like really, really upsetting. Just the thought that I won't be able to do it. Okay. So what we call subjective units of distress, so let's call it 10, right? SUDS. 10. Okay. I say, well, okay, but you're sitting in a chair in my office. Do you actually have a threat? Is there a threat here that requires you to be like 10 out of 10 in terms of distress, overwhelmed and not being able to cope? She goes, no. Right. And this brings us to one of the fundamentals that I discovered many years ago, actually working with PTSD. Many years ago I realized that all anxiety is an overestimation of threat. Now, many of the people that know my work will go, yeah, okay, we remember that, Dave. We've seen that before. Yeah, okay. But it's true here. She is a competent student, but she's overestimating the chance of failure. That overestimation of the chance of failure is making her engage with the emotions of fear, which is an overestimation of threat. That's made her feel like she needs to avoid and in fact run away, which is an over-exaggeration of what people would normally do. And of course, she's a perfectly good student, but she feels massively stressed, which makes her concentration poor, which makes her memory poor, which means that sometimes her mind just goes blank. You know, all of these things interfere with her normal functioning. Okay, so I don't want to like overbake this, but let's put it this way. Sitting in my office, she is safer than she feels. I think that's fair, right? Sitting in my office, she is safer than she feels. She feels extremely frightened and stressed and sort of wrung out and tense, but she is safer than she feels. Okay. If anxiety is always an overestimation of threat, we have to break this cycle, because this cycle goes round. I think it, I feel it, I do it, my body reacts. I think it, I feel it, I do it, my body reacts. It goes round and around and around. It goes like a whirlpool. Okay? So how do we break this cycle? Well, I am a big fan of the truth. I'm a big fan of what's actually the truth. What's true. And what's true is she is overestimating the threat that she is under, right? So it is true to say, therefore, that she is safer than she feels. I mean, it just is true, right? And in fact, everybody who struggles with anxiety is safer than they feel. Everyone who struggles with depression is more competent, more capable than they feel. And it would be true of everything. So we're always either overestimating how bad things are and how badly we'll do, or we're underestimating how good things are and how well we'll do. So what we do is we cut this circle, we stop it from performing as a circle, and we cut it here. And we created this statement, which many of my followers will be aware of. We said, I am safer than I feel I am. I am safer than I feel I am. So my thoughts are dwelling on failure, and my emotion is fear, but actually I am safer than I feel I am. And now if you think about it, that is true for you. If you struggle with GAD, you are safer than you feel. Now it's really important to get your head around this, because this is a saviour. This is a real big insight that you can have for yourself. And if you're able to recognize that you're safer than you feel you are, just in principle, right? I know you don't feel safe, but you are in logical, external reality safer than you feel you are. Okay. But now's the point. You don't feel safe. So you might know that you're safer than you feel you are, but you don't feel safe. So what do we do about that? Well, we use the power of practice. We want to practice believing what's actually true. It's crazy stuff, this, isn't it? We want to practice believing what's actually true. Well, how do we do that? Dead simple. We simply say, I am safer than I feel I am. And we use it as a mantra. Now, I know this sounds like quite a simple intervention. And it's so simple because I developed it, 25 years ago. And it's simple because I've used it hundreds and hundreds of times. And I'm explaining it to you in a simple way. But if you want to feel safer, and I guarantee this always works, but only if you do it. If you don't do it, it won't work, right? You say, I am safer than I feel I am. And you say it like this. I'm safer than I feel I am. So you say it under your breath, you move your mouth, you hear it, you think it, and you say it 10 repetitions as a set, like this, right? I'm safer than I feel I am. 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 So you do 10 repetitions as a set. And you do 20 sets a day spread out throughout the day. Now, that's 200 repetitions in total. Now, my general motto for Anxiety Wizard and for Self Help CBT is this, is you can basically change your life in 10 minutes a day or less if you put the effort in. And it will take you 6 minutes to say, I am safer than I feel I am. That's it, 6 minutes. Now, there are two things to do though, right? The first one is you've got to do the 200 repetitions. The second thing is you've got to remember to do it spread out throughout the day. If you did all 200 repetitions at 9 o'clock in the morning, you'd feel good. But at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you won't remember because you've tied all the repetitions to a particular time context. So you spread the repetitions out. 10 repetitions in a set, 20 sets a day, virtually every 20 minutes, half hour. Now, this is a very, very powerful exercise that always works. But I'm going to ask you to do one thing before you do it. I'm going to ask you to consider the thing that you fear the most. You know, the sort of the worry that's occupying your mind right now. And I'm going to ask you to say, well, how upsetting is it? How distressing is it? And give yourself a SUDS rating, right? So if you just say if it's 8 out of 10, make a note of that before you do the exercise. And I'll tell you why. Because when you feel better, you won't remember how bad you felt. Okay? And you'll say, oh, it's because the medication's finally kicked in. How long have you been taking medication? Oh, about 2 years now. It's finally kicked in, right? No. Rate your distress level. Give it a number. Write it down in your notebook somewhere. Okay? Do this exercise for a week. Now, the more repetitions, the better. But I would typically expect, if you did this as prescribed, I would expect your distress to halve in a week. And I would expect it to go down to be reduced by 3/4 or even more in 2 weeks, okay? So that's the level of input we need for this. Now, I don't want to like overload you with homeworks, but this is an absolute fundamental. If you break this cycle, it's not a complete solution for GAD, but all of a sudden we're teaching your brain that because you feel fearful doesn't mean that there's something to be frightened of. We're starting to separate out the emotion from the thought, and that breaks the cycle, and it starts to give us cognitive control. It starts to give us control over the experience. So that's the homework. I'm safer than I feel I am. 10 repetitions in a set, 20 sets a day spread out throughout the day, which is going to take you 6 minutes, but you've got to remember to do it, otherwise, well, it won't work. And if it doesn't work, it's not because it's ineffective, it's because you didn't do it. I've done this with hundreds of clients and it always works. And there are very few things you can say that always work. And why does it always work? Because it's actually true. Your task is to believe what's actually true. Wow, this is crazy stuff. I look forward to talking to you next time, and thanks for tuning in.